A Family Road Trip by Kyle Giefer. Sarah, a fifth grade student, is excited, very excited. Why? Because her and her family are finally getting to go onto their family road trip to Boston, Massachusetts. Sarah is a large history fan, and in her class, they've been learning about the Battle of Bunker Hill recently in the Revolutionary War. With characters like William Prescott, she's intrigued to learn more, and she hopes that this family road trip will be a great way for her to explore it. When they finally arrived at Boston, Sarah already begins to look out at the fields. Her curiosity runs wild as she thinks about what must have happened here 200 years ago. Sarah was instantly shocked and intrigued to see on the field the old cannons that were there way back when. Something she had also seen pictures about in textbooks in her class, but never really able to actually notice it in person. She was surprised to see how large they were, and never imagined them to actually be that big. Sarah looked over the fields and just imagined what it must have looked like back in 1775. Seeing all those soldiers marching in lines across the fields, it must have been very intense. Sarah thought about people like William Prescott and what they must have thought when they looked across the field and saw so many more British soldiers. She remembered to know how back then the colonists were very small in number and needed help by the French to stop the British. So this time, seeing so many more British soldiers rather than so many little colonists must have been very, very intense for people like William Prescott. Sarah and her family continued to explore the old fields, seeing how they almost looked like they were untouched, even though these were once great battlefields 200 years ago. She was hoping to actually be able to see a statue of William Prescott, though, as none of her textbooks had any images of him, and she was really intrigued by him specifically. During the tour guide would tell them all kinds of crazy things that Sarah had even heard about in her own classroom, like with Bunker Hill. The battle only lasted 2 hours, but in that 2 hours, the British lost over 1,000 soldiers. She couldn't even begin to fathom how that must have looked that day. It made her even more intrigued by everything else. When they finally made it to the top of Bunker Hill, Sarah was amazed. She gasped out loud even, seeing this huge obelisk sticking out of the ground, and a statue standing in front of it, looking small compared to the huge obelisk. Colonel William Prescott. The statue stood above her. She was amazed, her parents even shocked, looking at it all. The tour guide telling them about it. It was all great. The history they learned today is something else. This trip was worth it. That's what Sarah thought to herself, as she looked back at the trip they'd had. Coming to Boston was great. They learned so much from these fields, the museums, the statues, the tour guide. It was great, knowing that she now had so much that she could go back and tell about to her classmates, and even her teacher. Seeing history firsthand like this was really interesting, and something that not a textbook could ever do. And that's why she's so happy that her parents took her on this trip.